Two trees stood at the center of the world, shedding a seamless flow of gold and silver light that never dimmed. The radiance saturated the air, turning the atmosphere into a liquid glow. Beneath their boughs, the gardens of Valinor bloomed in a cycle that knew no decay. Petals opened and held their color against the passage of time. Beyond the groves, the white towers of Tirion rose into the sky, surfaces polished to a mirror finish that caught the light and threw it back across the plains. Every angle of the city shone like worked pearl. In the high halls of Formenos, the light gathered and focused, drawn into the heart of a single crystal casket. Inside, 3 jewels pulsed with a trapped holy fire. They did not flicker. They burned with a steady, rhythmic intensity that anchored the peace of the entire realm. King Finwë sat before them, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, his gaze locked onto the shifting brilliance within the stone. The world held its breath in the presence of the light, a perfect, silent equilibrium where every surface gleamed and every moment felt eternal. At the outer rim of the world, the light faltered. It did not fade, but it bent, pulled toward a jagged silhouette that stood against the radiance. Melkor moved through the periphery, his form a tear in the fabric of the brightness. He did not walk, he encroached. Where he passed, the air grew thin and cold, and the vibrant colors of the gardens dulled into shades of ash. He stopped at the edge of the high halls, his eyes fixed on the crystal casket. His fingers twitched, not with the desire to possess, but with a hunger that demanded the end of all things. He watched the Silmarils pulse with their holy fire, and the sight ignited a cold, focused rage. He did not want the jewels to serve him. He wanted to crush the light they held until the world was as hollow as his own heart. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air, fingers curling into a claw as if to squeeze the radiance out of existence. The light around him shivered. He turned away from the throne, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor, and began his descent into the wastes. He was no longer a spectator of the peace, he was the architect of its undoing. Every step he took left a stain on the ground, a mark of the void he carried within him. The air in the wastes tasted of dry ash and iron. Melkor walked until the ground beneath his feet turned to cracked gray shale. Here, the light of the trees did not reach. He stopped before a wall of absolute, light-drinking darkness. It was not a shadow cast by an object. It was a physical absence, a void shaped like a spider. Ungoliant hung in the center of the stillness, her limbs shifting like smoke in a vacuum. She did not breathe. She waited. Melkor stood before the abyss and bowed, his movements deliberate and cold. He spoke, and his voice rasped against the silence like stone grinding on stone. He offered her a feast that would never end, a promise of light to consume until the world was drained of its radiance. The void shivered, the darkness around her pulsed, expanding and contracting with a rhythmic, ravenous hunger. She moved, her form flowing across the rock like ink spilled into water. She accepted the pact. In that moment, the malice of the one merged with the bottomless appetite of the other. They turned back toward the heart of the world. The border of Valinor did not stop them. Melkor moved through the golden fields, his presence a jagged tear in the perfection of the land. Beside him, Ungoliant flowed like a stain of spilled ink, her form absorbing the very air around her. They did not walk. They bled into the scenery, a creeping blight upon the flawless grass. High above, Telperion and Lorelin reached their zenith. The light was absolute, a seamless, blinding flow of gold and silver that turned every leaf into a mirror. The towers of Tirion gleamed with a brilliance that seemed to vibrate against the sky. Yet, as the radiance hit its peak, the shadows did not retreat. They deepened. Melkor and Ungoliant moved toward the center of the world, their path marked by the sudden, sharp wilting of flowers where their feet touched the soil. The air grew heavy, thick with a pressure that silenced the singing of the birds. The light fought to hold the ground, but the darkness was patient. Every step took them closer to the source of the brilliance. The world held its breath, suspended in the final, fragile second of its own perfection. Melkor lunged. His spear struck the bark of the trees, driving deep into the living wood with a sound like a mountain cracking. Sap, bright and searing as liquid sun, sprayed across the grass. Ungoliant did not hesitate. She surged forward, a mass of shifting, light-drinking void, and wrapped her limbs around the wounded trunks. She pressed her form into the fissures, her mouthparts working with a rhythmic, tearing motion. The light did not fade, it was stolen. Gold turned to ash gray. Silver curdled into thick, oily soot. The radiance of the world began to bleed away. The trees shivered, their leaves curling and turning brittle as the life was drained from their veins. For a heartbeat, the light flared in a final desperate pulse, illuminating the horror of the scene. Before the void swallowed it whole, the glow vanished. A suffocating, unnatural darkness slammed into the world, thick as wet wool and cold as the deep earth. The towers of Tyrion disappeared. The gardens vanished. The world was blind. The darkness did not linger at the sight of the dead trees. It moved. Melkor and Ungoliant tore through the landscape like a storm of shadow, a physical weight that pressed against the horizon. They traveled north, leaving a trail of withered ground and shattered stone. The gates of Formenos stood ahead, massive and locked against the encroaching gloom. Melkor did not pause. He reached the threshold and tore the iron hinges from the stone with a single, grinding heave. The metal screamed as it gave way. Inside, Finwë stood alone. He felt the shift in the air, the sudden drop in temperature that signaled the arrival of the void. He drew his blade, the steel ringing in the unnatural silence, and braced his feet against the floor. He was a king standing against the end of an age. Melkor loomed in the doorway, a mountain of malice that blotted out the remaining stars. He did not speak. He moved with a brutal, singular motion. The sword in Finwë's grip clattered to the floor. The king fell. For the first time in the history of the world, blood touched the soil of Valinor. Melkor did not look back at the fallen king. He moved toward the center of the room, where the crystal casket sat on its pedestal. The air around it hummed with a trapped holy fire. He raised his hand, fingers curling into claws, and brought them down with the force of a falling hammer. The crystal shattered. Shards sprayed across the floor, ringing like bells in the heavy silence. Inside, the 3 Silmarils lay exposed. They pulsed with a light that defied the surrounding shadow. Melkor reached for them. His skin hissed the moment he made contact. The jewels burned his palms, searing his flesh with a white-hot intensity that smelled of ozone and scorched earth. He did not pull away. He snarled, his muscles bunching as he forced the burning gems into the iron of his crown. The metal groaned under the pressure, glowing red where the light touched it. He slammed them home, locking the fire into the cold steel. The pain was absolute, but it was nothing compared to the hunger he had satisfied. He turned, his movements jagged and swift. Together, they surged out of the hall and into the northern wastes. They left behind a trail of ruin, a path of dead earth and broken stone that stretched toward the horizon. Fëanor reached the threshold of his home, his boots crunching on the shattered remains of the gate. The silence inside was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against his chest. He moved through the hall, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, searching for the source of the stillness. He found the pedestal first. The crystal casket lay in jagged pieces across the floor, the interior hollow and cold. The light that had once defined his life was gone. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room, and found his father lying on the stone. Fëanor knelt. He pressed his fingers to the cooling skin, feeling the finality of the stillness. He did not cry. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his focus. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and stiff. The grief that had threatened to break him only moments ago vanished, replaced by a cold, hard pressure behind his eyes. He looked at the empty pedestal, then toward the north, where the darkness still clung to the horizon. His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. He did not look back at the body. He turned toward the door, his posture rigid, his breathing steady and shallow. The sorrow had burned away, leaving only the white-hot core of a singular, relentless intent. Fëanor stepped into the courtyard. The Noldor stood in rows, their faces pale, their eyes searching his for a sign. He did not speak at first. He walked to the center of the square, his boots striking the stone with a rhythmic, heavy sound. He stopped and raised his right hand, fingers spread wide, pointing toward the northern horizon where the unnatural darkness lingered. He drew a breath that seemed to pull the very air from the space around him. He spoke one name: Morgoth. The word hit the silence like a falling stone, echoing off the towers and vibrating through the ground. It was not a title, it was a curse. The crowd shifted, a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind through dry leaves. Fëanor turned to them, his gaze locking onto the faces before him. He did not offer comfort. He offered a path of fire. He spoke of the theft, of the blood on the soil, and of the light that had been extinguished. His voice rose, sharp and cutting, driving the grief from the air and replacing it with a singular, burning purpose. The Noldor stood straighter, hands moved to hilts. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, shared resolve. The peace of the world had died in the dark, and in its place, a new age was forged in the heat of his words. Fëanor turned back toward the north, and the army moved with him. The long war for the Silmarils had begun,